It's been an eventful couple of weeks for you. In the UK, some of the story has come out, but basically, you were appointed to the Digital Council in France, which was an advisory board for the government, right?
So yeah, I was appointed to be a member of the Digital Council. It was an unpaid and voluntary position. When my appointment was made public, some people started to protest and to complain on social media and behind the doors by calling the President's office and the Prime Minister's office. And then, so the head of the Digital Council decided to resign, and everyone resigned after her except one person.
So the entire council except one person resigned after what happened with you?
Yes.
And what were the main issues that people had with you being appointed to this council?
The main issue was my opinions about state racism, about the right of Muslim women to wear a hijab. And the other reason was the fact that I could be critical towards Charlie Hebdo and some of the things that they were producing, meaning that I totally support their freedom of speech, but I also support mine, meaning that I can, I can be against terrorists and terror attack, but also not supporting what they say.
So there were calls for you to be removed from this board. And how did you feel when that happened?
I felt like the persons who complained about my appointment were the same person who was standing for freedom of speech in general, and more particularly for Charlie Hebdo. So I was surprised to see that my freedom of speech didn't have any value to them, and that we were free to say things until a certain point. And saying, as a black woman, that I was thinking that there was racism operating at a state level was not possible. Or it was possible, but not in the public sphere.
The issue of state racism or institutional racism, it's such a particular subject in France, the way that secularism or laïcité works in France. That means that the state is seen to be colorblind. And that, on the surface, it seems like a good thing, it seems like a positive thing. So what is it that you mean when you talk about state racism or institutional racism?
Because I think that there is a theory in France, which is universalism, which would mean that the state should be colorblind. But the reality is that in France, if you are young, Arab or black, or at least perceived as Arab or black, you are 20 times more likely to be checked by the police than if you're not. So that's what I call state racism, because you have in France 10 to 15 people who die every year in the hand of the police, and 90% of them are Arabs or blacks from the poorest neighborhoods. So that's something we need really to address, because it's killing young people and it's something that is related to race.
From abroad, this looks quite embarrassing for Macron, because he was pitched as the complete opposite to Marine Le Pen, a very unifying force. He appealed a lot to the minority vote against Le Pen. What do you think this says about Macron's government in the first year, and about the image that was given and the reality that has appeared in the past few months?
I think that Macron was not that appealing to minorities. I think that many people from the minorities actually didn't vote. And what was appealing to people was mostly the fact that there was Marine Le Pen on the other side. So we know that her party stands for racist ideology, so that's the reason why people wouldn't vote for her. But if you get the big picture and you see who voted and who didn't vote, I don't think that the support from the minorities to Macron was that wide. I don't really have the feeling that Emmanuel Macron has any clear agenda regarding racism or race equality in France. I have never heard him saying anything really revolutionary regarding these issues.
If you believe that that the president is not doing much about racism and he doesn't have a strong vision in terms of what to do about racism in France, why did you want to serve on the Digital Council, which would be advising the government?
So I choose to be part of that project because I really liked what Marie Eklund, who was the head of the council, wanted to make with that council. She wanted to think about the France of tomorrow. It was an unpaid position, So to me, it would mean that I didn't have any like dependence from the government, and that would make me able to still use my freedom of speech and say whatever I want to say regarding the government or the Congress. To me, being criticizing your country, being like very demanding regarding the laws, the rights of the minorities in your country doesn't prevent you from trying to do something. Like to me, I can be saying that there is state racism in France, and at the same time trying to do my best to try at least to tackle it and to find solutions.
With everything that's gone on with you over the past few weeks especially, do you have hope for the future and the direction that France is taking regarding things like racism?
Yes, I'm hopeful. If I was not hopeful, I wouldn't do anything. I think that what really drives me is hope. I think that there are things that are positive. The fact that people who are trying to address racism have a new space to express themselves, especially social media. Having social media, they can spread some messages, they can share their perspectives. And I'm sure there are younger generations that are aware of the fact that there are racial tensions in France and who are able to produce different contents. There can be journalists, there can be filmmakers, there can be writers, and many of them, according to me, will produce different contents that will feed the French culture and make them able to transform the narrative.